So, good evening, and my sincere thanks to everyone both in the room and online for coming and supporting this essential practice of Fusatsu. My name is Bokushu, and just to review the structure of what we're doing, we begin with atoning. This is a ceremony of atonement. So recognizing the harm that has been done and that has been thought of being done in the world since the beginning, whatever that was, whenever that was, not just our individual doings and thinkings, but everyone's. We are connected to everyone throughout all space and time. And with our bowing and kneeling tonight, we embody that connection. So we begin with atonement. All evil karma, since beginningless time, born of my body, mouth, and mind, I now atone for it all. And once we make atonement, then we connect with the energies that are both the guardians and exemplars of our practice, starting with the 7 original Buddhas. So those who are before Shakyamuni, who is next. These are mythical entities who embody again or exemplify qualities that we aspire to in our practice. And then we go through other energies such as Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. I almost called Avalokiteshvara the Biddy of compassion. I hope Avalokiteshvara can tolerate being called an old biddy. Of course, Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. Wisdom and compassion, both are needed if we are to live the precepts. And Samantabhadra, the Bodhisattva of strength and vow. We need that too, don't we? We need a lot of strength to uphold the precepts. And I'll be talking quite pointedly about that tonight. So after that, we have a teisho. That's what's happening now. Your vows, as you've been told before in many talks, are not to this individual, but to the kaishi, the one who offers the precepts. The formless one who is temporarily embodied in this. And after this talk, we will, let's say, formalize our oneness with the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the 3 treasures, which uphold the precepts. So the structure of the precepts themselves are, we have 3 refuges. There are 16. 3 refuges, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which we conclude with in this ceremony. Then there are the 3 pure precepts, which I'm going to get into in a little more detail in a moment, and then the 10 grave precepts. And what normally happens in these talks is that the speaker will pick one of the grave precepts and kind of dig into that with a lot more detail. But tonight I'm going to do something a little different, and I'll explain that. So I was thinking as I was preparing for this talk that the precepts have been around for maybe 2,500 years, give or take, and that humanity as a whole is believed to have had ethical codes and guidelines and legal systems for maybe twice that long, maybe 5,000 years, probably longer, but we simply don't have the records. And yet, strangely, despite an incredibly long history of precepts, rules, guidelines, laws, systems, codes, we still have an incredibly fucked up world. Have you noticed how unbelievable this world is? I think we're always tempted to say it used to not be this crazy. I don't know. whether it used to be this crazy or not. But let's just acknowledge that right now it ain't going too well. And yet we've got 5,000 years of people telling each other what to do. And these are pretty common among religious traditions. The precepts are a little different. There's not enough time to get into all of that now. Comparative religion is not my specialty. I don't know what my specialty is, but we are struggling as a people, despite lots of indicators pointing away from what we tend to be doing. So I was wondering, what can I, this tiny vessel of temporary precepting, do in the context of our persistent inability to adhere to the moral, ethical, and legal principles that we lay out for ourselves time and again? So you have to ask, what is the source of the problem? Is it that the guidelines are wrong? Or is it that the way that we're approaching the guidelines is wrong? Where's the root of the problem? I think there's a lot of agreement about the guidelines. So I'm not going to critique those so much as our execution of the guidelines. How do we actually approach being ethical? Or, as some put it, and I do not, being moral? Maybe that's the issue. And I thought I would approach that question by asking a question of you, which is there justice in this world? Have you seen, or do you consider the world to have justice? The reason I frame it this way is that there were two quotes that came to mind recently, and I thought they were in such remarkable contrast that they actually point to why humanity is having so much difficulty adhering to its own guidelines. One is on March 31st, 1968, almost 60 years to the day, 60, I can't count. 55 years ago, almost exactly, Martin Luther King Jr. at the National Cathedral said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." And he was paraphrasing an abolitionist named Theodore Parker, who had said something rather similar 115 years earlier, in the years leading up to the Civil War. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And just a year ago, give or take a couple days, Donald Trump, speaking at the Conservative Political Action Committee, said, "I am your warrior. I am your justice. And for those of you who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution." So I think whether you consider yourself to be a fan, an adherent of either Dr. King or Donald Trump, you can probably acknowledge that there is some significant distance between what those two individuals are talking about when they use the word justice. I don't think anyone, well, look, it is such a crazy world. Maybe there are people who would say, well, yeah, they meant the same thing. I don't think they mean the same thing. That's my understanding. And if we can't mean the same thing when we use a word like justice, well, where are we going to get our common understanding of what the behavior and actions are to be taken to create a just world? How can we create a just world as a group when we have such unbelievably different ideas of what justice might look like? Each of you could be adhering to the precepts as you understand them and using that adherence to create a world that you consider to be more just, and yet the world in each of your visions would look significantly different, perhaps radically different. So, with so little common ground about the meaning of what we're talking about when we talk about the ethical principles that guide us toward what each of us imagines we would like the world to be like, I thought it would be useful to talk about how we can approach the precepts. I would like to offer some operational framework to help with this issue of people not looking the same way at very basic concepts. Maybe they're very sophisticated, but I think each of us has a very strong opinion about what these things are. So, this gap between what people think when they look at the ethical principles that animate their actions, when they espouse their values, this gap has led to a lot of violence. So as people have been so busy upholding ethical principles and passing and trying to obey laws and codes, they've actually been violating the spirit of what they've been putting forth. These codes, these understandings have led to violence. Obviously, if we are to uphold the precepts, we can't turn them into an instrument of violence. So what can we do to make them operational in our lives? One of the things I've always loved about the precepts is how spacious they are. If you read the text, either the Zen Peacemaker text, the commentaries of Bodhidharma and Dogen, you get remarkable spaciousness. It's not, for example, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. That's not what we say in this tradition. We say, not misusing sex. That's a lot broader, isn't it? A lot more spacious. It's more than just traditional living arrangements and traditional marriage. It's all sorts of ways that people can and do engage in sexual contact, sexual conduct. And I've always admired that about the precepts, but in their spaciousness, I think there can be a certain lack of footing in how we ascend this slope of ethical behavior that we might want to climb. So what are the possible elements that could give us more of a foothold as we seek to uphold principles that have time and again not worked out for the people that created them? I think the first one that came to mind for me was, we must admit that we do not know what a just world would look like. I'm not saying we don't have ideas about it. I'm not saying we don't have opinions about it. We absolutely, each of us has plenty of opinions about what a just world would look like. And those opinions are exactly the problem, because when they clash with other people's opinions, that's when things get unethical and violent a lot of the time. So I want to mention the first pure precept, not knowing, thereby giving up fixed ideas about myself and the universe. Talk about spacious. Wow, that is as big as it gets. But I think one thing that can happen is that people can get confused about what this really boils down to. Not knowing is a hazy concept. I'm not saying that I know what not knowing is, but I'd like to point to another place in the teachings where this might be clarified. And that's case 19 of the Mumonkan, where there's a dialogue between Nanquan, a very famous disciple of Matsu, and his disciple who is extremely famous also, Zhao Zhou. And I urge you to read the koan in its entirety, but there isn't time for that now, so I'll just read the most salient part of it. Tao does not belong to knowing or not knowing. Knowing is illusion. Not knowing is blankness. So it's not about when you say not knowing, thereby giving up fixed ideas about myself and the universe. It's not that you've suddenly been lobotomized and you have no sense of anything, and you have no mooring, and you have no guideposts in your own understanding. It's that it's a difference between this. This is right, and this is what I believe, and this is what I will fight for. I will be your retribution, right? That thing, this kind of clenched fist knowing, that is not the way to uphold the precepts. And that is why that's the first pure precept. We must approach these with a very different frame of mind. So not knowing, though, on the other extreme, is blankness. So if we're going to be effective in living the precepts, effective might not be the word, but let's just use it for now. We can't just, well, yeah, I don't know, anything goes, man, it's all groovy. That's not really going to do it either, is it? That's just going to lead to a sort of nihilistic vacuum in which people can do whatever they want and it's somehow okay because we don't know. Well, in fact, when the time comes, under the circumstances presented to you, you do know. Not in this way, although people do approach it this way, but you got a pretty good sense of what is not good and what is good and wholesome in that situation. What is going to promote nonviolence? What is going to promote healing? What is going to promote, what is going to not harm? What is going to be a way to end suffering, right? That's the question on the table. So when push comes to shove, I think we all have a pretty strong sense of that, which isn't to say that we're right or that we have it for sure. So it's this wide ground between those two extremes of clenched fist and loosey-goosey Stonerville, let's say, that we can be effective in reflecting and living the precepts. So that's the first thing that I'd like to propose as an operational step. Admit that we don't know, but understand what not knowing means, and to not be paralyzed by it or dogmatic about it. The second, well, in this regard, there's something related to that I think is important. As I said earlier, we don't know what a just world is, but we have opinions about it. Can you distinguish between your opinions and facts? This isn't something we talk about at the Zendo very much, but it is absolutely critical to living an ethical life, in my opinion, that we understand what are opinions, in my opinion, what are opinions and what are facts. And we have a lot more opinions than we have facts. And the opinions are okay. There's nothing wrong with having opinions. But understand that they're opinions and that other people have their own opinions. And our opinions, no matter how sincerely held and strongly voiced, are no more valid than other people's opinions. So this is part of the knowing, not knowing picture. Know when your opinion is not a fact. And I think you know that. I think we all know that. But in our zeal to see our own vision of justice realized, we forget what's an opinion and what's a fact. Second, when we take an action or refrain, as importantly, refrain from taking an action, why are we doing it? I think this really helps me. This helped me recently. Somebody sent me an email that I thought was quite stupid. And I don't have a lot of patience with what I perceive to be stupidity, which of course is not to say that I myself don't exhibit stupidity with great regularity and intensity. But this email struck me that way. And it was a group email, and I was ready to reply to that email with my own opinion about why it was stupid. I wasn't going to use that word, okay? I was going to be a little adult about it, but basically I was going to tell the person off in my usual diplomatic way. And then I asked myself, well, why should I do this? What's the point really? Am I interested in advancing the understanding of people in this conversation, or am I just trying to show off and display my superior wisdom in this particular instance as I see it? And it was much more the latter than the former. And this isn't always easy to discern. I mean, you can advance discussion while showing off your wisdom, but often it's just one or the other. So as soon as I recognized my own motivation, it was clear that I didn't need to respond. And I'm not sure whether my responding as I would have mattered much either way, but it was a lot less work. And it just eliminated a whole layer of chain reactions that might have occurred. The original person being offended, other people being annoyed or wanting to jump in with their opinions. I just left it alone. And it felt good. It feels good to withhold action when the motivation isn't to reduce suffering. Ask yourself, when the moment comes, am I really interested in reducing suffering, or is it something else that we could all do without? That's two. And then the third and the last, but not the least, is to live the precepts without attaching to the results. So this is where the closed fist gets particularly insistent, is, not only do I know what is right in distinction to what you think over there, but I'm going to fight for it, and I'm going to make sure it happens. I am going to be responsible with my mob to make it happen. Well, even if you have a mob, it may not happen. And you might find out you're looking at some serious jail time. So maybe you can just offer your ideas for what might make the world better without imposing them on other people. Because if we all did that, if we all imposed our vision on each other about what it should be like, it would be complete and utter chaos and living hell, which is pretty damn close to already, if you want my opinion. It's pretty difficult already. So can we not do that to each other? Can we offer our sincere engagement with the ethical teachings without this? And see what happens. That's such a great thing to do, to make a contribution with these ideas that I don't know. I have a feeling, I have an understanding, I have an intention to reduce suffering. I don't know. Let's offer this and see what happens. Amazing things can happen without my individual agency. And I enjoy more and more when I can allow that to see what will happen without my agency. So these are the three sort of operational things that I would like to offer around these incredibly spacious precepts. And I'll just point out, in relation to the last, that attachment to results leads to violation of the precepts. Specifically, it directly leads to talking about others' errors and faults, which is the sixth precept, indulging our anger, which I've done plenty of, the ninth precept, and elevating ourselves while blaming others whose values we don't share, the seventh precept. And if you look at the precepts in relation to action, you will usually find that a given action that you contemplate could violate more than one precept. It's remarkable how often they are invoked in the same scenario. And maybe you could make up a little game for yourself where you can think of scenarios that invoke all 10 of them. All 10 of the, it could be like a bingo card. It's like, what can I not do that will prevent me from breaking all 10 at once? Because there ain't no prize for that. I'd like to close with a quotation that I've always loved since I heard it. This is from Koryo Osaka Roshi, one of our ancestors. He was one of Bernie Glassman's teachers, a lay teacher, if I'm not mistaken. And he wrote, "Our responsibilities do not arise from externally established rules or regulations, but rather such feelings as are supposed to be a spontaneous expression of our inner state. When you become aware of what life is, of who you are, as a natural result, you become much more aware of other people. You become very naturally compassionate, concerned about other people, so that, without being told or regulated externally, you can quite well accomplish the things you wish to do. Those are the vows. And if there is any responsibility as such, that is to become aware of what life is." What is life? Right now, it's the precepts. Thank you.